Jazz guitar and especially jazz chords can feel like a maze of endless options, and many beginners feel completely overwhelmed. Having taught jazz for more than 20 years, I've seen that very often. But in this video, I'm gonna show you 3 things to get right when learning jazz chords, making it a lot simpler and helping you play a lot better. This is stuff that I wish someone shared with me when I started, because it helps you think about the chords in the right way, play better rhythms, and it'll also get you started with chord melody. The first thing might seem a bit strange, but it will make sense once you zoom out. I remember the first time I was introduced to jazz chords and how exciting it was to hear these rich sounds with all the extensions. And that is of course a huge part of what is great about jazz chords. But when you're playing, you don't want to think about it like that at all. The problem is that you have a lot of options when it comes to which notes you include in the chord. And nobody has time to think about 15 different types of G7 when they're also trying to play a song. I certainly remember the stress of trying to keep up with the song and figuring out how to play the chord, and that just never works. Instead, you start by thinking a basic chord, so just a G7, and then you think of a sound of that chord. In this case, you can think of G7 as a basic 5 chord in C major. There are 2 advantages to this. You think of G7, and if you're here on the neck, then you have these notes available. And these can all be put on top of the chord, so instead of many chords, you have variations of 1 chord. The other reason why this is important is that you can turn that G7 into a phrase. You're not just playing a static chord. And here I'm just thinking G7. I'm really kind of just thinking the simple chord. You don't have to think 4 different chords with different extensions. So it remains just thinking this and then this melody on top. Clearly, it's a lot less complicated to think 1 chord, not 3, and all you have to be aware of is that it is a G7 in C major. It is not as important exactly what these notes are in the melody or exactly what extensions are used. And you can make it even easier to play. As a beginner, this is a pretty good 3-step plan if you're learning a song. Step 1. Basic chords. You start by learning the basic chords. If we use the A part of Take the A Train, then you have these voicings. C major 7, the song is also in C major, then you get a D7, and then a D minor 7, and a G7. Then you have the whole A part covered. To make it easier to play and add melody to the chords, you can choose to play them as rootless voicings, which really is just leaving out the lowest note. Then you have C major 7, D7, D minor 7, and G7. Now it's a lot easier to add melody notes, and in the beginning just try a few notes. You don't need that much when you're comping anyway. It's not a chord solo. For these chords you can try 3 or 4 notes like this. And then you can start putting this to use on the song. Now the first few bars could sound something like this. Keep in mind that if you're not playing in a band, you can use the complete chords as well to make the harmony clear, or switch between voicings with a root and rootless voicings just to stay flexible. Let's move on to some rhythm, where I'll also tell you to do the opposite of what you expect. Another topic that I found incredibly difficult in the beginning was learning some rhythms to use when I was comping. I spent a lot of time listening to piano players like Herbie Hancock and Wynton Kelly, but learning rhythms always seemed sort of difficult and abstract. But there is a way to go about this, and the place to start is by learning a few basic short rhythms just to have a vocabulary as a foundation. So maybe start with the Charleston. And maybe a variation like this shifted Charleston pattern. Or add a note to the Charleston to create a variation. But what makes you better at comping or comping rhythms is more about the bigger picture and thinking in those terms. And you can train yourself to hear rhythms that fit together. I'm going to give you 2 exercises to work with, and let's stick to a single chord to keep it simple. I'll stay with the C major 7. Start with what I call the riff exercise, which may not be what you're thinking about when I say jazz comping, because that's all about improvising and new things all the time, where a riff repeats, but then often you add a variation at the end of a period to avoid it becoming boring. It's kind of similar to how drummers add a fill at the end of a 4-bar period. Now, the way to practice hearing better rhythms in this exercise is by repeating a rhythm that you already know. So let's take the shifted Charleston. I'll play that 3 times. And then in the 4th bar, you can stop, listen, and imagine a rhythm that might work. It's really okay to just try a few and see what you like. The point is that you listen to what you hear and try to play that. And then it's just about finding something that you like, trying it out a few times. So for example, you could do something like this. Or maybe this one. Repeating the same rhythm several times makes it much clearer and gives you more of an idea of what to keep and what to change. Often, if you play a very sparse riff with 1 or 2 notes like I am here, it's easier to have a more busy variation at the end. Even though it's about rhythm, then exploring this exercise out of time is fine. So repeat the first rhythm a few times and then take your time trying out a conclusion to finish this 4-bar period. Composing as a way to train your ears is also useful with comping rhythms. Now, doing this exercise, you're expanding your vocabulary of rhythms, but what is just as important is that you're also learning to connect the rhythms and make them really into music. Rhythm is the most important part of what makes comping sound melodic. You should also not underestimate how useful it can be to take a riff and just move it through some changes, and in that way create a very stable background for a soloist to improvise over. That is a skill you can get quite a few gigs with. Let's add another exercise and then get to chord melody. The next level to this exercise is to start making everything you play a conversation. So instead of repeating one rhythm several times, you now play a single rhythm and try to hear and play a response to that. Again, it makes sense to explore this out of tempo, just to get used to how it feels and develop a basic concept, while you also really give yourself time to listen and come up with, really be clear about what you hear. So start simple. Here's a chord with G7. And maybe this is a good response. And if you put these two together, then the whole phrase would sound like this. Again, this is about coming up with rhythms that fit together as a phrase. Once you have something like this, then you can even add some melody. Just keep exploring and developing new rhythms and melodies. From playing out of time, you can move on to playing in a slow tempo, but don't start with ballad tempos. I think medium slow swing is probably more useful in the beginning. And use really simple chords like this example with the Charleston rhythm. Let's have a look at some chord melody, because that is also incredibly useful for comping and not as difficult as you might think. Even in its most basic form, then taking a song and turning it into a complete orchestrated piece of music is super cool, and it's also a great exercise for a lot of useful skills with chords. You figure out what the melody notes are over the chord, you explore the neck to find the most playable solution for both the melody and the chords, and you play the most important part of the song. The melody. Knowing where the melody is becomes useful when you comp, because you don't always want to double it or have notes in your chord that clash with the melody. The basic method for turning a song into a chord melody arrangement is incredibly simple. I'll use the beginning of the jazz standard "Someday My Prince Will Come" as an example. First, try to learn the melody on the 2 top strings, mainly because that makes it easier to put chords under it on the remaining 4 strings. Notice that there are still quite a few ways to place the notes on the 2 strings, and as you'll see, you need to be a little bit flexible with this. Now you can explore adding chords under the melody, and what I'm using here is just basic shell voicings. Under the F, you have this B flat major 7, and under the high B flat, it's easy to just add a D7 like this. And here we can also grab the F sharp right away. Now for the E flat major 7, it would be nice to go to this chord, but then that A up here is kind of a stretch, so you move that to the 1st string, then you have. And then here on the G, we can have a G7. Same for the C minor. And on the G7 here, I can actually just reuse what I used for the D7. So first this, and then the B in here, and then we get C minor. And also the F7 is right under that melody. So that's easy enough. Once you go through the song, you'll find that it's not that difficult with a bit of exploration, as long as you can move the melody to the 2 top strings. Knowing the melody like this can really help you both support a soloist and also just get out of the way in the right places. And you really learn the sound of the harmony so much better when it's connected to the melody in this way. Now, there are a lot of things that you can do with the melody and the harmony in a chord melody arrangement. And once you start exploring all the possibilities for adding what Joe Pass describes as movement to your playing, then it really opens up. And I talk about that in this video, which will help you add some of those skills that give your chord melody and chord playing an extra dimension and can make the harmony flow beautifully. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.